So one of the things I wish I'd known when I was starting out in the recording industry was that the job of engineering is, and I guess producing is, almost as much customer service as it is technical. For example, if your client isn't relaxed, they're not going to do a great performance. If they've not got, if they're not comfortable in their recordings booth, if the room's too cold, if they haven't got enough water to drink, even if the decor is offensive, or then that can all affect their performance, and that's much more important than what microphone you're using, or what preamp you're recording through, or even what software you're using. It's all about how comfortable they are, and how good, what's going to get the best performance out of them. And along with that, I often find that maybe someone who's got the best session demeanor, the best vibe about them, is often more successful than someone who might be the best technical person but a bit of a stress head. I know personally, I've definitely had stressful periods in my past, and I've had to learn to relax a little bit. I'm sure some of my former bosses would say that, but I've definitely learned that it doesn't really matter what gear you're using. If something breaks, use something else. And the more you can do that, the more relaxed your clients will be, the better the session will go, and hopefully the happier they'll be with the end result. It's also worth mentioning that for some clients, for people who are maybe investing in it as a leisure pursuit as much as a career path, the experience is almost more important than the end result. If they make a recording and they have a great time doing it, they're much more likely to love the end result and want to come back to you than if you've produced what you think is the best recording ever, but they only have bad memories associated with it because it was a stressful time. They're not going to enjoy that as much. Even if they think it's a great recording, they're not going to want to come back. From a career perspective, that's important. So another thing that I wish I'd known when I started out in this industry is that there's a big difference between what people talk about online, in message forums, Facebook posts and things like that, compared to what actually happens in the real world. In the real world, there often isn't time to sit down and shoot out 5 microphones for a vocal. If you've only got a day with someone and you've got 3 songs to get through, then really you have to put up something that you think is going to work. If it sounds like it's working, then you go with it. Obviously, if it sounds terrible, then you change it. If you've got a choice of 2 really good options, then it's probably worth checking them out. If you've got a whole week to do an album's worth of vocals with someone, then yes, you will spend maybe a little bit longer. But the whole idea of choosing the best microphone in the studio for a vocal, and then choosing the best preamp and then the best compressor to go through it, that very, very rarely happens in principle. Where we learn is on previous sessions where you've tried something new, or you've tried something, you've got something different, and that's the only thing you've got in the studio. So you'll try that, and then you'll squirrel away that information in your head, and that'll come back to mind when you the next time you have that piece of gear to hand, maybe. So we tend to do, rather than sort of sitting down shooting at every little last piece of equipment, you tend to do your learning in previous sessions, or when using something else for the first time, and storing that memory so that when you think you've got a similar situation, you know what's going to work. So one more thing that I wish I'd known when I started out, from a technical perspective, when recording something like a drum kit, which is a number of different microphones around one source, the phase relationship and the polarity relationship between those mics is probably the most important thing, far more important than what exact mics you're using. Very little is more important than the source, the room you're recording in, and the player, but from an engineering perspective, maybe you're limited there. So given that those things are as good as they can be, the most important thing to do is to get the mics around that drum kit working together. The polarity relationship, when a sound wave is pushing forward and when it's pushing back, it's a bit, you can see this on the camera, of course, it's a bit like trying to push a kid on a swing. If you push at the right point, it'll work together and the kid will swing higher. If you push as they're coming back towards you, then the energy will conflict, and you won't get that, things won't work together. And it's the same with 2 microphones. If you've got 2 microphones, they're both capturing a sound wave that's going forward and back, they'll add together and it'll be a strong result. If one's going back forward and one's going backwards, then they cancel out, and often it ends up sounding thinner. In a practical term, what that means is when you press the polarity button on a mixing console, the snare sound will either get bigger or quieter in the speakers, and you want to record it when it's sounding bigger. Sometimes you'll receive a drum kit to mix, and you listen to the overhead mics. You've generally got 2 mics above a drum kit. The drum kit, and between the mics, the snare will hit, and it will just sound a bit weird, and not in one place. It will sort of come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and that means those overheads haven't been recorded very well. They've been recorded out of phase with each other, and then you've got a job to try and match things up afterwards. The easiest way to present that, I find, is to measure off of the snare. So you've got your snare drum, and you use a microphone cable or a measuring tape, and you measure from one overhead to the other overhead, and make sure that's the same. Then every time the drummer hits, the snare will be in the center of the overhead picture. And then with your close mics, you just make sure that each of them work against the overhead. You try changing the polarity. One way should sound much stronger than the other way. If there's not really much of a difference, then you try moving the close mic on the drum forward or backwards a little bit until it finds a point where it's working with those other mics. If you do all of that with each of your close mics against the overheads, then hopefully you've recorded the best picture of that drum in that space with that drummer. And then from then on, every other little piece of gear, every preamp, every compressor, every EQ is really a bit of a luxury to try and improve it. Apart from that, once you've actually recorded those close mics, hopefully everything you do then can be added to afterwards. If you're short of time, get your mics in the right places and just record. If you've got more time, then yes, you can experiment adding all the nice pieces of hardware in on that record chain. But the most important thing to do with the drum kit is to make sure that all the mics are working as close to positively with interacting with each other as possible.